welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wajenberg. This time we're going to continue our reading of Lilith by George MacDonald. Our narrator, Mr. Vane, is in a strange world where he has made strange companions and enemies, and he is about to lead an army of children on the city of Bulika, ruled by the princess Lilith. The undertaking did indeed at times appear to me a foolhardy one, but the confidence of the woman of Bulika, real or simulated, always overcame my hesitancy. The princess's magic, she insisted, would prove powerless against the children, and as to any force she might muster, our animal allies alone would assure our superiority. She was herself, she said, ready with a good stick to encounter any two men of Bulika. She confessed to not a little fear of the leopardess, but I was myself ready for her. I shrank, however, from carrying all the children with us. Would it not be better, I said, that you remained in the forest with your baby and the smallest of the little ones? She answered that she greatly relied on the impression the sight of them would make on the women, especially the mothers. When they see the darlings, she said, their hearts will be taken by storm, and I must be there encouraging them to make a stand. If there be a remnant of hardihood in the place, it will be found among the women. You must not encumber yourself, I said to Lona, with any of the children. You will be wanted everywhere. For there were two babies besides the woman's, and even on horseback she almost always had one in her arms. I do not remember ever being without a child to take care of, she answered, but when we reach the city it shall be as you wish. Her confidence in one who had failed so unworthily shamed me, but neither had I initiated the movement, nor had I any ground for opposing it. I had no choice but to give it the best help I could. For myself, I was ready to live or die with Lona. Her humility, as well as her trust, humbled me, and I gave myself heartily to her purposes. Our way lying across a grassy plain, there was no need to take food for the horses, or the two cows which would accompany us for the infants. But the elephants had to be provided for. True, the grass was as good for them as for those other animals, but it was short, and with their one-fingered long noses they could not pick enough for a single meal. We had therefore set the whole colony to gather grass and make hay, of which the elephants themselves could carry a quantity sufficient to last them several days, with the supplement of what we would gather every time we halted. For the bears we stored nuts, and for ourselves dried plenty of fruits. We had caught and tamed several more of the big horses, and now having loaded them and the elephants with these provisions, we were prepared to set out. Then Lona and I held a general review, and I made them a little speech. I began by telling them that I had learned a good deal about them, and knew now where they came from. "We did not come from anywhere," they cried, interrupting me. "We are here." I told them that every one of them had a mother of his own, like the mother of the last baby, that I believed they had all been brought from Bulika when they were so small that they could not now remember it, that the wicked princess there was so afraid of babies and so determined to destroy them that their mothers had to carry them away and leave them where she could not find them, and that now we were going to Bulika to find their mothers and deliver them from the bad giantess. But I must tell you, I continued, that there is danger before us, for as you know, we may have to fight hard to take the city. "We can fight, we're ready," cried the boys. "Yes, you can fight," I returned, "and I know you will. Mothers are worth fighting for. Only mind, you must all keep together." "Yes, yes, we'll take care of each other," they answered. "Nobody shall touch one of us but his own mother." "You must mind every one to do immediately what your officers tell you." We will. Now we're quite ready. Let us go." "Another thing you must not forget," I went on. "When you strike, be sure you make it a downright singeing blow. When you shoot an arrow, draw it to the head. When you sling a stone, sling it strong and straight." "That we will," they cried with jubilant, fearless shout. "Perhaps you will be hurt." "We don't mind that, do we, boys?" "Not a bit." "Some of you may very possibly be killed," I said. "I don't mind being killed," cried one of the finest of the smaller boys. He rode a beautiful little bull, which galloped and jumped like a horse. I don't either, came from all sides. Then Lona, queen and mother and sister of them all, spoke from her big horse by my side. "I would give my life," she said, "to have my mother. She might kill me if she liked. I should just kiss her and die." "Come along, boys," cried a girl. "We're going to our mothers." A pang went through my heart, but I could not draw back. It would be moral ruin to the little ones. Chapter 35. The Little Ones in Bulica. It was early in the morning when we set out, making between the blue sky and the green grass a gallant show on the wide plain. We would travel all the morning and rest the afternoon, then go on at night, rest the next day, and start again in the short twilight. The latter part of our journey we would endeavor so to divide as to arrive at the city with the first of the morning, and be already inside the gates when discovered. It seemed as if all the inhabitants of the forest would migrate with us. A multitude of birds flew in front, imagining themselves no doubt the leading division. Great companies of butterflies and other insects played about our heads, and a crowd of four-footed creatures followed us. These last, when night came, left us almost all, but the birds and the butterflies, the wasps and the dragonflies went with us to the very gates of the city. We halted and slept soundly through the afternoon. It was our first real march, but none of us were tired. In the night we went faster because it was cold. Many fell asleep on the backs of their beasts, and woke in the morning quite fresh. None tumbled off. Some rode shaggy, shambling bears, which yet made speed enough, going as fast as the elephants. Others were mounted on different kinds of deer, and would have been racing all the way had I not prevented it. Those atop the hay and the elephants, unable to see the animals below them, would keep talking to them as long as they were awake. Once, when we had halted to feed, I heard a little fellow, as he drew out of the hay to give him, commune thus with his darling beast. "Nosy dear, I'm digging you out of the mountain, and shall soon get down to you. Be patient, I'm coming. Very soon now you'll send up your nose to look for me, and then we'll kiss like good elephants, we will." The same night there burst out such a tumult of elephant trumpeting, horse neighing, and child imitation, ringing far over the silent levels, that, uncertain how near the city might be, I quickly stilled the uproar, lest it should give warning of our approach. Suddenly, one morning, the sun and the city rose, as it seemed, together. To the children the walls appeared only a great mass of rock, but when I told them the inside was full of nests of stone, I saw apprehension and dislike at once invade their hearts. For the first time in their lives, I believe, many of them long little lives, they knew fear. The place looked to them bad. How were they to find mothers in such a place? But they went on bravely, for they had confidence in Lona, and in me too, little as I deserved it. We rode through the sounding archway. Sure, never had such a drumming of hooves, such a padding of paws and feet been heard on its old pavement. The horses started and looked scared at the echo of their own steps. Some halted a moment, some plunged wildly and wheeled about, but they were soon quieted and went on. Some of the little ones shivered, and all were still as death. The three girls held closest to the infants they carried. All except the bears and the butterflies manifested fear. On the countenance of the woman lay a dark anxiety, nor was I myself unaffected by the general dread, for the whole army was on my hands and on my conscience. I had brought it up to the danger whose shadow was now making itself felt. But I was supported by the thought of the coming kingdom of the little ones, with the bad giants its slaves, and the animals its loving, obedient friends. Alas, I who dreamed thus had not myself learned to obey. Untrusting, unfaithful obstinacy had set me at the head of that army of innocents. I was myself but a slave, like any king in the world I had left, who does or would do only what pleases him. But Lona rode beside me, a child indeed, therefore a free woman, calm, silent, watchful, not a whit afraid. We were nearly in the heart of the city before any of its inhabitants became aware of our presence. But now windows began to open and sleepy heads to look out. Every face wore at first a dull stare of wonderless astonishment, which, as soon as the starers perceived the animals, changed to one of consternation. In spite of their fear, however, when they saw that their invaders were almost all children, the women came running into the streets and the men followed. But for a time all of them kept close to the houses, leaving open the middle of the way, for they durst not approach the animals. At length a boy, who looked about 5 years old and was full of the idea of his mother, spying in the crowd a woman whose face attracted him, threw himself on her from his antelope and clung about her neck. Nor was she slow to return his embrace and kisses. But the hand of a man came over her shoulder and seized him by the neck. Instantly a girl ran her sharp spear into the fellow's arm. He sent forth a savage howl, and immediately stabbed by 2 or 3 more, fled yelling. "They're just bad giants," said Lona, her eyes flashing as she drove her horse against one of unusual height, who, having stirred up the little manhood in him, stood barring her way with a club. He dared not abide the shock, but slunk aside, and the next moment went down, struck by several stones. Another huge fellow, avoiding my charger, stepped suddenly, with a speech whose rudeness alone was intelligible, between me and the boy who rode behind me. The boy told him to address the king. The giant struck his little horse on the head with a hammer, and he fell. Before the brute could strike again, however, one of the elephants behind laid him prostrate and trampled on him so that he did not attempt to get up until hundreds of feet had walked over him and the army was gone by. But at the sight of the women, what a dismay clouded the face of Lona. Hardly one of them was even pleasant to look upon. Were her darlings to find mothers among such as these? Hardly had we halted in the central square when two girls rode up in anxious haste with the tidings that two of the boys had been hurried away by some women. We turned at once and then first discovered that the woman we befriended had disappeared with her baby. But at the same moment we descried a white leopardess come bounding toward us down a narrow lane that led from the square to the palace. The little ones had not forgotten the fight of the two leopardesses in the forest. Some of them looked terrified, and their ranks began to waver, but they remembered the order I had just given them and stood fast. We stopped to see the result, when suddenly a small boy called Odu, remarkable for his speed and courage, who had heard me speak of the goodness of the white leopardess, leapt from the back of his bear, which went shambling after him, and ran to meet her. The leopardess, to avoid knocking him down, pulled herself up so suddenly she went rolling over and over. When she recovered her feet, she found the child on her back. Who could doubt the subjection of a people who saw an urchin of the enemy bestride an animal of which they lived in daily terror? Confident of the effect on the whole army, we rode on. As we stopped at the house to which our guides led us, we heard a scream. I sprang down and thundered at the door. My horse came and pushed me away with his nose, turned about, and had begun to batter the doors with his heels, when up came little Odu on the leopardess, and at the sight of her he stood still, trembling. But she too had heard the cry, and forgetting the child on her back, threw herself at the door. The boy was dashed against it and fell senseless. Before I could reach him, Lona had him in her arms, and as soon as he came to himself, set him back on the back of his bear, which had still followed him. When the leopardess threw herself the third time against the door, it gave way and she darted in. We followed, but she had already vanished. We sprang up a stair and went all over the house to find no one. Darting down again, we spied a door under the stair and got into a labyrinth of excavations. We had not gone far, however, when we met the leopardess with the child we sought across her back. He told us the woman he took for his mother threw him into a hole, saying she would give him to the leopardess, but the leopardess was a good one and took him out. Following in search of the other boy, we got into the next house more easily, but to find, alas, that we were too late. One of the savages had just killed the little captive. It consoled Lona, however, to learn which he was, for she had expected him to grow to a bad giant, from which worst of fates death had saved him. The leopardess sprang upon his murderer, took him by the throat, dragged him into the street, and followed Lona with him like a cat with a great rat in her jaws. "Let us leave this horrible place," said Lona. "There are no mothers here. This people are not worth delivering." The leopardess dropped her burden and charged into the crowd this way and that wherever it was thickest. The slaves cried out and ran, tumbling over each other in heaps. When we got back to the army, we found it as we had left it, standing in order and ready. But I was far from easy. The princess gave no sign, and what she might be plotting we did not know. Watch and ward must be kept through the night. The little ones were such hardy creatures that they could repose anywhere. We told them to lie down with their animals where they were and sleep till they were called. In one moment they were down, and in another lapped in the music of their sleep, as sound as a water over grass or a soft wind among leaves. Their animals slept more lightly, ever on the edge of waking. The bigger boys and girls walked softly hither and thither among the dreaming multitude. All was still. The whole wicked place appeared at rest. Chapter 36. Mother and Daughter. Lona was so disgusted with the people, and especially with the women, that she wished to abandon the place as soon as possible. I, on the contrary, felt very strongly that to do so would be to fail willfully where success was possible, and, far worse, to weaken the hearts of the little ones, and so bring them into much greater danger. If we retreated, it was certain the princess would not leave us unassailed. If we encountered her, the hope of the prophecy went with us. Mother and daughter must meet. It might be that Lona's loveliness would take Lilith's heart by storm. If she threatened violence, I should be there between them. If I found that I had no other power over her, I was ready, for the sake of my Lona, to strike her pitilessly on her closed hand. I knew she was doomed. Most likely it was decreed that her doom should now be brought to pass through us. Still without hint of the relation to which she stood to the princess, I stated the case to Lona as it appeared to me. At once she agreed to accompany me to the palace. From the top of one of its great towers, the princess had, in the early morning, while the city yet slept, descried the approach of the army of the little ones. The sight awoke in her an overmastering terror. She had failed in her endeavor to destroy them, and they were upon her. The prophecy was about to be fulfilled. When she came to herself, she descended to the black hall and seated herself at the north focus of the ellipse, under the opening in the roof. For she must think. Now, what she called thinking required a clear consciousness of herself, not as she was, but as she chose to believe herself. And to aid her in the realization of this consciousness, she had suspended a little way from and above her, itself invisible in the darkness of the hall, a mirror to receive the full sunlight reflected from her person. From the resulting vision of herself in the splendor of her beauty, she sat waiting the meridional sun. Many a shadow moved about her in the darkness, but as often as with a certain inner eye which she had, she caught sight of one, she refused to regard it. Close under the mirror stood the shadow which attended her walks, but self-occupied, him she did not see. The city was taken. The inhabitants were cowering in terror. The little ones and their strange cavalry were encamped in the square. The sun shone upon the princess, and for a few minutes she saw herself glorious. The vision passed, but she sat on. The night was now come, and darkness clothed and filled the glass, yet she did not move. A gloom that swarmed with shadows wallowed in the palace. The servants shivered and shook, but dared not leave it because of the beasts of the little ones. All night long the princess sat motionless. She must see her beauty again. She must try to think again. But courage and will had grown weary of her, and would dwell with her no more. In the morning we chose 12 of the tallest and bravest of the boys to go with us to the palace. We rode our great horses, and they small horses and elephants. The princess sat waiting the sun to give her the joy of her own presence. The tide of the light was creeping up the shore of the sky, but until the sun stood overhead, not a ray could enter the black hall. He rose to our eyes and swiftly ascended. As we climbed the steep way to the palace, he climbed the dome of its great hall. He looked in at the eye of it, and with sudden radiance the princess flashed upon her own sight. But she sprang to her feet with a cry of despair. Alas, her whiteness! The spot covered half her side, and was as black as the marble around her. She clutched her robe and fell back in her chair. The shadow glided out, and she saw him go. We found the gate open as usual, passed through the paved grove up to the palace door, and entered the vestibule. There in her cage lay the spotted leopardess, apparently asleep or lifeless. The little ones paused a moment to look at her. She leaped up rampant against the cage. The horses reared and plunged. The elephants retreated a step. The next instant she fell supine, writhed in quivering spasms, and lay motionless. We rode into the great hall. The princess yet leaned back in her chair in the shaft of sunlight, when from the stones of the court came to her ears the noise of the horses' hoofs. She started, listened, and shook. Never had such sound been heard in her palace. She pressed her hand to her side and gasped. The trampling came nearer and nearer. It entered the hall itself. Moving figures that were not shadows approached her through the darkness. For us, we saw a splendor, a glorious woman centering the dark. Lona sprang from her horse and bounded to her. I sprang from mine and followed Lona. "Mother, mother!" she cried, and her clear, lovely voice echoed in the dome. The princess shivered. Her face grew almost black with hate. Her eyebrows met on her forehead. She rose to her feet and stood. "Mother, mother!" cried Lona again, and she leaped on the dais and flung her arms around the princess. An instant more, and I should have reached them. In that instant I saw Lona lifted high and dashed on the marble floor. Oh, the horrible sound of her fall! At my feet she fell and lay still. The princess sat down with the smile of a demoness. I dropped on my knees beside Lona, raised her from the stones, and pressed her to my bosom. With indignant hate I glanced at the princess. She answered me with her sweetest smile. I would have sprung upon her, taken her by the throat, and strangled her, but love of the child was stronger than hate of the mother, and I clasped closer my precious burden. Her arms hung helpless, her blood trickled over my hands and fell on the floor with soft little plashes. The horses scented it, first mine and then the small ones. Mine reared, shivered, and wild-eyed went about and thundered blindly down the dark hall with the little horses after them. Lona's stood gazing down at his mistress and trembled all over. The boys flung themselves from their horses' backs, and they, not seeing the black wall before them, dashed themselves with mine to pieces against it. The elephants came on to the foot of the dais and stopped wildly trumpeting. The little ones sprang upon it and stood horrified. The princess lay back in her seat, her face that of a corpse, her eyes alone alive, wickedly flaming. She was again withered and wasted to what I found in the wood, and her side was as if a great branding hand had been laid upon it. But Lona saw nothing, and I saw but Lona. "Mother, mother," she sighed, and her breathing ceased. I carried her into the court. The sun shone upon a white face and the pitiful shadow of a ghostly smile. Her head hung back. She was dead as earth. I forgot the little ones, forgot the murdering princess, forgot the body in my arms, and wandered away looking for my Lona. The doors and windows were crowded with brute faces, jeering at me, but not daring to speak, for they saw the white leopardess behind me, hanging her head close at my heel. I spurned her with my foot. She held back a moment and followed me again. I reached the square. The little army was gone. Its emptiness roused me. Where were the little ones, her little ones? I had lost her children. I stared helpless about me, staggered to the pillar, and sank upon its base. But as I sat gazing on the still countenance, it seemed to smile a live, momentary smile. I never doubted it was an illusion, yet believed what it said. I should yet see her alive. It was not she, it was I who was lost, and she would find me. I rose to go after the little ones, and instinctively sought the gate by which we had entered. I looked around me, but saw nothing but the leopardess. The street was rapidly filling with a fierce crowd. They saw me encumbered with my dead, but for a time dared not assail me. Ere I reached the gate, however, they had gathered courage. The women began to hustle me. I held on heedless. A man pushed against my sacred burden. With a kick I sent him away howling. But the crowd pressed upon me, and fearing for the dead that was beyond hurt, I clasped my treasure closer and freed my right arm. That instant, however, a commotion arose in the street behind me. The crowd broke, and through it came the little ones I had left in the palace. 10 of them were upon 4 of the elephants. On 2 other elephants lay the princess, bound hand and foot, and quite still, save that her eyes rolled in their ghastly sockets. The 2 other little ones rode behind her on Lona's horse. Every now and then the wise creatures that bore her threw their trunks behind and felt her cords. I walked on in front and out of the city. What an end to the hopes with which I had entered the evil place! We had captured the bad princess and lost our all-beloved queen. My life was bare, my heart was empty. But this is not the end of Mr. Vane's story, nor of the princesses, and we will continue it next time.